Today we're going to be talking about Microsoft Teams. This is the third in a three-part series that we've done on Microsoft Teams. Specifically today, what we're going to be looking at is how to collaborate or communicate or work with somebody that's outside of your organization. Because obviously we've seen through the past sessions that we've done how powerful Teams can be when you're working with someone internally. But we've had a number of clients ask us, can you work with someone outside of your organization? And if you can, what does that look like? And that's what we want to kind of run through a little bit today on. So there's going to be some of the back end that I'm going to show you from the admin side, just so that you can see what it takes at a very high level to set that up. But then as well kind of show you more or less what the communication then looks like for somebody if you're actually looking to communicate with them from outside of your organization. So before I jump into that, I want to give a little bit of background on who the presenters or the gentleman is that's going to be answering a number of the questions today, and then as well give a little bit of a background on CCB technology. So my name, if you haven't read it on the screen already, is Logan McCoy. I'm the Vice President of Services. I've been with the company for, it's almost coming up on 13 years now. I started back on the sales side, and I moved over to the services side where I oversee both our professional team and our managed service team back in 2015. The other gentleman who's going to be helping today is Jacob Tarowski. He's our Director of Enterprise Architecture. He was the one that actually did the webinar last week and ran through much of the technical side on the admin, both managing teams and administrating it from that perspective. But he's going to be answering any of the questions that come through today. So as you have those questions and you're asking those, he's going to try and answer as many of those as possible as he can. Now with that, and you've seen this slide a number of times if you've been on these sessions, but if this is your first one, if you weren't able to join the first two, and you don't know who CCB is, because I see a lot of familiar names within the attendee list, but for some of you, I don't know who you are from what I'm looking at there. And so if you don't know who we are, as a quick backstory, we started over 29 years ago, back in 1991. We're based in Racine, Wisconsin. We've had offices all over the nation at different points in time. We started as a traditional VAR, right? So we worked with a number of nonprofit organizations to help them to procure the software and hardware that they needed. And it created kind of out of this vision that the founder, Chris Booth, had of really helping nonprofits get the technology that they needed at an affordable budget so that they could then use their budget for what they were really going for, what their mission was actually for, right? So that's how we started. But about it's actually a little bit over that now, about 10 years ago, the current CEO, Patrick Booth, actually had the vision to expand what we do and how we serve our clients. And so he actually created the services division. So we moved beyond just this kind of procurement, value-added reseller type model to more of a true managed service provider, where now we're helping our clients implement Office 365. We're coming in and helping them put in a brand new firewall, a whole new infrastructure. In fact, that's most of the projects that we're doing now. Clients are looking to refresh their server infrastructure, their switch stack, whatever it might be, and we're coming in and kind of doing a wholesale swap of what that looks like, right? But really, we've been a Microsoft partner for over 20 years at this point. And so a lot of these solutions revolve around the Microsoft stack, which is why today we're presenting on Microsoft Teams. One of the things before I jump into that I always like to point out, and you'll see it kind of down there on the bottom right, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been within the top 150 MSPs in the nation. So even though we've only been an MSP for 10 years, we've been in business for over almost 30, I should say, but an MSP for just over 10 a little bit here. Because of that, we've actually risen then to the rank of within the 150 largest and best MSPs in the nation. So it's something I always like to point out because we're very excited and proud of that achievement that we've won for a number of years now. So for most of you, if you've been on these sessions, you're going to be really familiar and aware with what is Microsoft Teams. But just as a really quick foundation again, and for some of you that have been on these, this is probably going to be like, oh, he's probably going to say the same thing, and I am, but I'll do it really quickly here, which is more or less that Microsoft tried to take two solutions. One solution was Skype, and one solution was SharePoint. And in doing that, they saw the benefit of both of those, but then saw what could actually happen if they combined those. So that's essentially what they did with Microsoft Teams. They took the communication aspect of Skype, so whether it was video presence, whether it was instant messaging, whether it was the ability to share out your screen, right? They took that component and they coupled that with SharePoint, which was that overall document repository, but where it really came to life was to be able to collaborate, right? So that if both of you needed to work through a PowerPoint or an Excel document, you could do that real time and you didn't have to be in the office, right? So that's what they did with Teams. They took both of those and they brought it into one. And so what Microsoft Teams really is meant to do is it's meant to go not just across departments within an organization, but as we're going to show today, even go outside of the organization to allow you to communicate and collaborate in a way that prior really wasn't accessible or feasible or as easy to set up. It took a lot on the back end. And as you'll see here, there's still some things you need to take into account, some things you have to work through, especially when you're bringing in people from the outside. Because if you have any types of things from a compliance perspective, HIPAA, PCI, so on and so forth, or even just sensitive data that your organization doesn't want leaked, these are things that you need to take into account and to be aware of, right? But at the core, at essentially what it is, that's what Microsoft Teams is. So given all of that, let's jump out of this presentation here and let's actually jump into going through a quick demo of Microsoft Teams and what it looks like to work with people outside of your organization. So I actually have a demo tenant. In the past, I've actually used our own internal tenant here, but we don't have full access that I'd say both on the external and guest side. And so I didn't want to set all of that up for our organization just right now. So I just went and did that within the demo tenant. Now, the one thing I'll say here is what I'm going to show you first off, because I thought it would be helpful to give you a delineation between what is external and what is guest. Because Microsoft will say to you, are you setting up external access or are you setting up guest access? And initially, if you hear that verbiage, you think, well, isn't that the same thing? And if you're thinking about it, it is. But with how Microsoft defines it, it actually is referring to two different things. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if you're an admin, and I have to stress that you would really only be doing this if you're on the admin side. So if you're a global administrator, a Teams administrator, something to that effect within your Office 365 tenant, you'd have the ability to look at this and see this. If not, you're not going to be able to have access to that, right? And you shouldn't have access to that. So if we're jumping into the admin portal here, we're going to jump down to the Teams section listed right down here. So the Teams administration portal. And from there, we're going to be going into the org-wide settings. Now here you're going to see those first two listed. Again, external access and guest access. And you might think, wait, why wouldn't it just be the same? Well, something that Microsoft has done actually that I think is a really great move is they have separated out, if you want to have your users basically have the ability to communicate with users outside of the organization, but not necessarily add them to a team. So if you remember from past sessions where I've shown you that within Teams, there's really kind of two main components, right? There's the chat component and there's the Teams component of Teams. Well, the external access here is dealing with the chat component. So you can see it right up here. It actually says it really nicely. If you want to allow external access for your Teams and or Skype for Business users to communicate with users outside of your organization, then you would want to give them external access. If you want somebody to be able to actually come in and add a guest to a team, so this goes beyond chat. Now they actually can be in a specific team, in a specific channel, and collaborate with you on that, then you would want to provide guest access. And so what's nice that Microsoft is doing more and more is they're kind of giving these little, I'd say, tidbits or disclaimers of what actually is this that I'm doing, right? So with external access, as I mentioned, you can very simply go in here and check these two boxes, and I'll mention what those are in a moment, and that'll give you external access, which again is related to chat. The guest access component is going to be related to giving someone that is a guest that's outside of your organization access to a team or a specific channel, right? And it notes that right up here. So jumping right back to external access, as you can see what's listed right within here, you basically, this is, I'd say, a little bit more simplified than what you're going to see on the guest access side. Because really at this point, you have two options. You can allow users to communicate with other Skype for Business and Teams users that are outside of your organization. And you can also allow users to communicate with just Skype users. Now, something that Microsoft launched, and it was hard for me to know. I know that it's available in this tenant, it's available in ours, but I couldn't determine if actually it's been rolled out to everybody, because Microsoft has kind of been doing a number of these things in different rollout fashions. Like for example, we just got access to be able to have the 3x3 view, where now it's not just 4 people that you would see when you're doing a Teams video call, it's 9, right? We just got access to that, but we've had some clients that have had that for almost a month, because Microsoft just kind of rolls this out, and we've seen that they typically actually do this last for partners. So I don't know if everybody has access to this, because it was supposed to be fully launched in April 2020. Microsoft almost never does that on time. So I wouldn't be surprised if you jump in there if you don't see this, because this is relatively new. But basically what this allows for is, what I'm going to show you in a moment is when you check this, this is going to give your user that's in your organization the ability to communicate with somebody else that's most likely within a corporate type environment that has Microsoft Teams, that has a full Office 365 tenant, right? To simplify it in those terms. But this for Skype users is going to allow you to communicate with somebody that might not even be in an organization like that. It could be an individual. So we, for example, have an organization that I know works with individuals that might not necessarily be tied to a specific organization because they do more freelance type work. And so if they have a Outlook.com account, a Skype account, and this is checked within your organization, then those users would have the ability to be able to communicate with those outside users that aren't tied necessarily to another specific organizational Office 365 tenant, but are just overall have a Microsoft account, which is a really great thing. Now, listed down here, and it actually notes it right up here, that by default, your organization can communicate with all external domains, meaning that if this is checked on, your users are going to be able to talk to anybody that they want to. But if you then start to add domains, you can actually select if you want to allow that domain or if you want to block that domain, which is a great little functionality, because if you only want your users to communicate with a specific domain, well, then you could go in there and say, I'm only wanting to allow this specific domain. And as it says up here, if you add block domains, all other domains are going to be allowed. But if you add allowed domains, then all other domains are going to be blocked, right? So basically, either or, whichever you do, it's going to set the policy then on the reverse for that as well, which is a really great thing. Like I mentioned, if you only want your users to communicate with specific domains, it's a great way to manage that, right? So this has actually been checked here, and something that I'll note right now so I don't forget it, because I think it'd be good for you guys to know, and it popped into my mind, so I didn't want to forget. When I went in and activated this on this demo portal, this was instantaneous for me, meaning I was trying this with my demo user that you're going to see in a moment. So not the admin account. I actually have a demo user with just standard E3 licensing, all that kind of stuff. And initially, they were not able to communicate externally. I went in there, checked this, and within a minute, because I just refreshed it basically after that point, it was then showing up for me. Now, when I do that for guest access, it actually will pull up a little note here. And because I've already allowed it, it's not going to show it again. But because I did this, it actually pulled up a little note right at the top up here that says, please be aware it may take 2 or 3 hours. Actually, I think it's at a few hours, to be a little bit more general than that, for this to be populated and to become available within your tenant. So I did test that for a period of around 2 hours, and I still didn't have access to that. I did this at the end of the day yesterday. So I just figured I'll say a prayer, and hopefully Microsoft has actually allowed that to happen this morning, and it did. So I can't say for sure it was within 2 to 3 hours, but either way, what I'm wanting to let you know is the external access, when you checked that, was pretty quick. The guest access, though, takes anywhere from 2 to an evening for that to get populated out. Just a good thing to note if you have somebody that needs it right now and they need it on the guest access side, that's not necessarily as instantaneous. So before I do the guest here, jumping back to the external, so I've gone and checked in all of this, so let's actually go in and let's jump in as a user. So I need to get the password for this user, which is listed over here. I'm going to pull that up. Let's copy that. And I'm signing in as Isaiah. Please don't judge me for using Microsoft Edge, by the way. I just have used Chrome, Firefox, and a number, because I'm using a number of different accounts here. Edge was on there, and I needed to use that for this. So this is a standard user, like I mentioned. This is not an admin user. So we're going to jump into Microsoft Teams. Let's list it right here. Let that load. And the great thing that you're going to see that hopefully this communicates to you in this regard as well is that you can do this both in the full version as well as the web-based version. So I'm obviously doing this here on the web-based version, but this is also available within the actual web-based version as well here. So I'm going to focus on the chat, because if you remember me saying the external access is related to chat. So I want to go ahead and I actually want to communicate. If I'm Isaiah here, I want to communicate with Logan McCoy. Logan McCoy is listed outside of my organization. So I'm going to type this in here. Now what it's going to say is it's going to say, oh, now here's the thing. I'm already listed within this tenant because I did this as a test yesterday. If I didn't, what it would show you right here is it would say, Logan McCoy is not listed in here. Would you like to search for Logan McCoy externally, which it's still showing down here. Now, the reason why it's showing as a guest is because I'm listed within that. But if I want to go ahead and search, then it's going to go and find that user under the other domain that has Microsoft Teams. That's what I'm selecting. Now I want to start a conversation. Saying, hi, Logan. And then what is going to populate over here, I'll take a quick screenshot of it so that you guys can see it on this screen here. Actually, I'll just pull over my whole team so you can see it. So it pulled up a normal little dialog box. You can see this is coming from Isaiah. These are the communications that we're having. Just say, hi, Isaiah. You're probably going to see a number of different messages pop up here. We'll drop that down. I don't want to see that. So communications are happening just like they normally would. I don't know if I necessarily need to run through the chat component any further because it's the chat component that I've shown you as it works both for internal users communicating with one another, right? But that's how easy it was for me to actually just go right up here, type a new message, search for that user. Because that external access is granted there, then I had that, and I could very easily go in and right from there do what I needed to do. So that's a quick overview of the external access. And if you remember me saying, that's a little bit easier from the setup side of the house than the guest access side for Teams. And the big reason for that, if you remember, is that as Jacob was even talking about last week, when you are talking about guest access and Microsoft Teams, so the team component within Teams, you're actually on the back end talking about Office 365. And Office 365 ties in a number of different items from SharePoint to OneNote to a shared mailbox and a shared calendar, right? Even though it doesn't auto-mount that shared mailbox and shared calendar, it's still created when that's put in there, right? And so you've got all these different things that are tied into an Office 365 group, which is why the guest access is a little bit more, there's just more manageability and more that you can configure, which is great because you really only want to have shared within those teams what you want to have shared, and you want to exclude or preclude anything else, right? So coming into the guest access here, the very first thing you want to go in and check is to allow guest access in Teams, right? And then from there, you're going to have a number of different options. So from a high level, what do you want them to be able to do from a calling, a meeting, and a messaging aspect, right? And even within the messaging, you can get down to some pretty granular levels like, you know what, I'm okay for us to use Giphies internally, when we're doing that between communications and it's all within an organization. I don't necessarily want to do that externally though, because maybe it's with a client and I just want to make sure that we're maintaining professional communications. So in this case, I'm going to turn that off so that that's just not available, right? Or I could go and I could say, I'm just going to make it very strict so that it is bland, vanilla. There's nothing that can come across that would be seen as inappropriate, just to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, right? So you can get relatively granular in that. Now, to ensure though that you're able to actually add a guest and share everything else that you need to do, there are a few additional things that you need to keep in mind. And there's actually a great little article that Microsoft has put together. I'm going to pull it over here for you just so you can see it. If you were to just type in Microsoft Teams guest access checklist, there's 5 things that they really want you to look at, right? So the first one is what I did there, where you turn on guest access on the Teams org-wide level. And it goes through those few other things that you need to do. So really quickly as an example, in order to do this, another thing you're going to want to look to do is to go into Azure Active Directory. You're going to want to go into users. You're going to want to go into external. So go to users here. You're going to want to go into user settings. I always forget that that's the step. You're going to want to go into external users, manage external collaboration settings. And then you're going to want to come in here. They've got a nice little checklist of what you should check, not check, depending on what you want members and guests to be able to do, right? But that's another thing that you're going to have to make sure that you've got set up. One other thing that you need to make sure that you've got set up is under settings. You're going to want to go to org settings. And under services, you're going to want to go to Microsoft Office 365 groups because as I mentioned, Office 365 groups are tied on the back end here for Microsoft Teams. And you're going to want to make sure these are checked because as it says here, you want to let group members outside your organization access group content, right? And then you want to let group owners add people. So here's a key one. If you want to be able to allow this, but you don't want group owners to be able to do this, then you could uncheck that, which would then restrict who can and can't add those people, obviously, right? Which is a great way to do that. That's one other thing you're going to have to do to ensure you've got guest access set up in the way that you want it set up. The final thing is under the settings component as well, there's sharing. So you're just going to want to be able to say, do I want to be able to share content and files? So basically this is tying in the SharePoint component. So let users add new guests to the organization so that those types of information or that type of content can be shared out, right? So like I mentioned here, if you were to just type in, oh, I think it was on a different, was it this one? Yeah, if you were to just type in Microsoft Teams guest access checklist, then that's going to pull that right up there for you. It's pretty easy and straightforward. Now, from the perspective of, let's jump back into a user and see what that looks like, right? So if we're going back to Microsoft Edge, that's how I can delineate that there, and I'm going into a team, and I'm Isaiah here, and I'm going to go to the team sales department. I'm going to go in and I want to actually add a member. So under US Sales, I would like to add a member. I'm going to add a member here, and I'm going to add that as loganmccoy.guest. Now, here's the key thing I want to note to you guys really quickly on this is if you remember me saying you can add Skype users, so non-Skype for Business or non-Microsoft tenant, non-Office 365 domain kind of corporate organizational. So that's my personal account with Microsoft. Then I've also got my business account. Now again here, it's got me in this system already within this tenant because I've already done this. If I hadn't, then it'd say, hey, we can't find them. Would you like to search externally? Type that in, it would pull them up and you'd go from there. So now I'm gonna go and I'm gonna add Logan.McCoy at CCB Technology to that. I'm gonna go ahead and close that out. And then what I'm gonna get over here, if I pull it up down here, is an email. I'm gonna pull that up here so you can see it. So I get this email, which just says, Isaiah added you to the US sales team. You can see this came from this email address here, came to my Logan.McCoy at CCB Technology. I could open that in Microsoft Teams. If I wanted to do that, I can use the web app here. It's gonna pull me into that team. And I'm only going to see that, well, I might see two teams, yeah, because this one up here I added this morning, but this other one that's listed right here is the one I just got added to, right? So I actually right within here now can communicate and do anything that I need to. Now, if I jump back to Isaiah, I believe was an owner under US Sales. So if I want to manage the team and I want to manage those permissions or those settings, I can go down to guest permissions. And I can say, hey, I want to allow guests to be able to create and update channels. So if you see back from here, if I come in here, I do not have the ability to add a channel. This is my Logan.McCoy account. But if I want to allow guests to update and create channels, if I come back over here, I'm just going to refresh really quickly. Let that populate. Come back up here. Now I have the ability to add a channel. So again, relatively quick with how those changes are taking place. But because of everything that I've got set up, and this is basically carte blanche, like I could do more or less anything within here. I can see the content, share the content. I don't think I can delete a channel. I didn't check that. But more or less anything within here I can do. But you can get fairly granular on what you want to allow those guests to be able to do, right, within all of that. So looking at the time here, we're at 10:24. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything else before I jump into Q&A. And I don't think so. I think that was the little last bit of it, which is great that we've actually got a few minutes here for some questions. So I've got a few questions that have popped up here that I want to try and address here really quickly. So the first one is, it's around licensing. So it says, do guest users need licensing? You know, it's interesting, I actually had another client bring this up last week. So guest users do not need licensing. You don't have to go out and buy like this massive external connector license like you would for CALs in the past if you needed outside people, if you know the days of volume licensing and what that looks like. And basically what the ratio is that Microsoft is and says and does is they say you need a 5-to-1 ratio. And what they mean by that is for every user in your portal that has a license, so let's say you have 10 licenses of E3, it could be E1, E3, whatever it is, you have 10 licenses, then you would be allowed to have up to 50 guest users in your organization. Now here's the key delineation between all of that, because this is where the client last week was getting confused on that. Is that in order, you could actually go in and exceed those 50 users. And that's actually what happened to this client. They actually, I think, only had about 85 users and they exceeded that up to 150. And they're like, wait, this doesn't make sense. How am I at the 150, but I should only have 85? What Microsoft is saying is they're basically more or less doing it on an honor system, which just means if you know the days of CALs, so client access licenses and how that was, is that basically Microsoft was saying, we're just expecting you to buy the number of licenses that you actually need, but there's no technical limitation that we're putting in there to prevent you from going over that. And the only way that Microsoft polices that is by their audits, which they do. We've actually had to help a number of clients as they've gone through the audit process. So I don't want to make mention that they've never happened. They are few and far between. But basically what Microsoft is saying is it's not a technical limitation with how many guests you can have within your tenant, but it is a licensing limitation. So it's just something that you have to know of and be aware of. And if you go in and kind of look at, okay, what's guest licensing for Microsoft Teams within Google, it's going to pull up a nice little article that kind of fills you in. There's some back-end things you can do and even some scripts you can create to make sure that you're managing that properly. Because again, it's not a technical limitation, it's a licensing limitation, right? The other question is, oh, this is a good one. Do you need to have one of the accesses enabled to have another one of them enabled? So I think what they're asking here is like, do you need to have external access enabled to be able to enable guest access and vice versa? And the answer is no. So you can actually have external access enabled and not have guest access enabled. And that's actually internally for us for Teams, what we have. We do not have guest access enabled at this point in time, but we do have external. A key thing to note with some of that is even if you do have external, you might run into issues because it's most likely going to be coming through your firewall. So some things to test and check are some of your firewall settings if after you enable external access, just as a little bunny trail on that note. But what I will say too from my experience is that while Microsoft's documentation says you don't need them both, my own experience was, and even in working with this recently yesterday, when I wanted to add my Skype, my personal Skype account, the logan.mccoy@live.com, so if any of you ever want to reach out to me personally, there it is. I was not able to do that with just external access. However, even though the checkbox, you'll see if you remember, the little slide was under external access for settings, but when I did have it enabled for guest access, and then I went back and tried it under the external access, so tried it under chat, I was able to. So what Microsoft says in their documentation it's not, I will say from my experience, it seems like there is something tied there that didn't allow it, or maybe that just took a while to populate. That could have been the case as well, right? So looking at the time here, I do see a few questions coming in additionally, but just to kind of keep us on schedule as we're at 10:28, what I'm going to say is for any of those other questions that have come in, like I mentioned at the beginning, what we're going to do is either have, if you have a dedicated CCB account rep, have them reach out to you to either set up a call with myself or Nick Lepore to kind of answer those specific questions for you. If you don't have an account rep, then somebody's going to be assigned to help reach out to you to make sure we actually get those questions answered for you, because we want to make sure that we do get those taken care of that's relevant for you in that regard. So just in closing here, something that we've seen quite a lot about is that a lot of users are excited, a lot of clients are excited about using Microsoft Teams, and they're just not sure how to get started. And so we've had a number of clients that have said, we want a training and we want to kind of train our users to make sure that they know how to utilize this, right? But one of the things that we've noticed is that in doing the training, there's a I don't want to say a fair amount of setup, but there is setup that is technical in nature, or that you just need to have almost gone through it or done a fair amount of research to make sure that you're only setting up what you need, right? So that you can hit the ground running, so that you can have guest permissions set up to the degree that you want to, so that you can have meeting settings and team settings and all of those different components set up so that you can, like I said, really hit the ground running. And so what we've kind of taken beyond just the training is we've created a Teams starter package. And we're calling it a starter package because what we're wanting it to do is to go beyond just simply training, just simply end user focused training. And so what we've created within this package is essentially a three-pronged approach that, as we've seen, has kind of really helped cover varying components to enable a client to really jump into Teams really quickly so that you can be using it once this is up and running, essentially from day one. So the three things that it includes is, one, it does include that end user 365 training, normally between 2 to 4 hours, depending on how many users we're talking about, depending on if we're doing like redundant training because we want smaller groups, right? But it's normally in that time frame, and it runs through everything. So it runs through, you know, what the navigation of Teams looks like, how to communicate in chat, what does Teams look like, what's the difference between chat and Teams, how do you set up a team, how do you manage a team, how do you set up a channel, and all that stuff, right? That goes into that end user focused training so that users have a really good holistic perspective of what is Teams, how do I use it, how's it relevant to me. The other key component then is really around that consulting approach, and this is where it's a little bit more narrow in focus. We're probably only dealing with your admins or the key personnel within your organization, and we're working through, how do you want to deploy teams? How do you want to set up teams? What kind of teams do you want to create? Because a lot of times people think of teams only in departmental focus, but if you've kind of gone through these sessions, you've hopefully seen really Teams comes to life because it enables you to communicate across departments, right? Or in this case, even outside of the organization. So really trying to help consult on, how do you want to roll this out and what do you want this to look like for your users? Right, is the second key component. And then the third is we're actually going in and doing some of that initial base setup for you. So one of the big things we've talked about in these sessions, right, because the sprawl is real, as Jacob mentioned last week, if you don't lock certain things down, within a week, you could very easily end up getting 15, 20, 30, 40, 100 teams, right? And from a management perspective, that's going to be a headache. And from a security perspective, specifically on data leak, that's also going to potentially be a concern, right? And so we'll actually come in and do the initial base setup for you so that those permissions are set up properly, so that you don't have to worry about it and you can simply hit the ground running and do what you need to do in that regard. So with all of that, if you're interested in it, what I want to mention to you again is if you have a dedicated CCB account rep and want to learn more about the Team Starter Package, reach out to them. If not, send us a quick message here right within the Q&A. We'll definitely get someone associated to you so that we can have them reach out and share a little bit more of what that looks like. And as always, I've shared this on every one that I've done, but there's all of my contact information should you want to reach out to me directly. I've had a few of you reach out, and I know we've kind of worked through and talked through some things, which has been great. So it's all listed right up there for you guys if you do need to get a hold of me. But with that, what I wanted to say finally is thank you. Thank you for taking the time to work through with us what is Microsoft Teams, how to administrate it, how to manage it, how to work with people outside of the organization, right? We hope that this time has been valuable to you in this three-part series, and we hope to continue to see and hopefully have the opportunity to work with you in the future. So with all of that, I hope you guys all have a great day and that you stay safe and healthy. Thank you.